everyone. Welcome to another edition of A Rare Reality, a podcast powered by Jordan's Guardian Angels. I'm Christina Janes, Director of Outreach and Awareness for JGA. And today we are talking all things siblings. We have an incredible panel here today with us. Abby Turnwald is here from Dayton Children's Hospital in Ohio. She's a certified genetic counselor. And Dr. Jessica Duis is here with Children's Hospital Colorado. She's a clinical and genetics and genomics specialist, pediatrician as well. And all of you know Lexi Levine, our sibling extraordinaire, who we are so excited to have with us again as we really focus on the siblings in our Jordan syndrome community. So Abby, Jessica, you guys have done some pretty incredible work focusing on siblings. So let's talk about this research. Abby, can you walk us through what brought you to this and why you thought this was so important?
Yeah, so I have worked with people with different disabilities since high school. And then in my undergrad, we had a cool volunteer program that you got matched with a child and you worked on fine motor, gross motor, kind of like therapy skills once a week. And a kid I was paired with had Angelman syndrome. So I got pretty close with him and his family, and I really got to start to see that family dynamic. Every time they came to pick him up it was on Saturday mornings, his two sisters would just run and give him a hug, but then he would try to pull their hair. And then sometimes there'd be arguments, things going on. And it really got me thinking, do they know he has Angelman syndrome? Because I had to Google it and figure out what it was at that point. So I was really thinking, what is Angelman syndrome to them? Do they actually know? They were all under 10 at that point. So it was really just kind of that mystery to me. And then when I found genetic counseling and was thinking, I really want to do a meaningful project. Sometimes people do capstones that other people have ideas for, but I just started brainstorming, like, what could I do that would be helpful and fill a gap in this rare disease world? And so that's when I started to think of that family again and wanted to do something related to siblings and specifically Angelman syndrome. And I was able to luckily go to Colorado and work with Jessica, who's amazing, and really make that connection to make all of this happen.
So Dr. Duis, how does this happen? How does this process work?
So we have a multidisciplinary clinic and center of excellence here that focuses on multiple disorders, including Angelman syndrome. And part of a focus of our research and data that we collect from the clinic is actually related to sibling health. That's in part related to my own personal journey and wanting to make sure that we represent siblings and the impact of rare disease on siblings. And so there's multiple ways that you can make this happen. We did some survey work. We generally collect information about siblings for anybody that comes through our clinic to try to understand what the impact on a rare disease diagnosis and all of the characteristics of that particular rare disease on sibling health and how that affects their relationship with their parents and siblings as well. And so we were able to put together and work with actually parent advocacy groups and other siblings of rare disease individuals to put together projects where we can collect information from the siblings. And really then our goal is to share the sibling stories and put them out there in multiple different ways. One of the ways that we've done that for Angelman syndrome is actually put together some children's books, really focused on understanding different aspects of health in Angelman syndrome and how that impacts siblings to try to use as a discussion point or educate friends of siblings and siblings themselves about what causes different rare disorders, starting with Angelman syndrome.
Pretty incredible because, Lexi, you've seen firsthand the impact that comes to an entire family. You have this family unit, and now all of a sudden your world is very different. So talk about your experience there. I know many of our families know, but what's that like?
Yeah, honestly, Abby described my family in that little intro. Like couldn't help but smile because that sounded just like me and my sister running to greet my brother off the school bus, and he definitely would have pulled our hair as well. So I think for us, we always knew that something was not quite right with Barry. But as some of you might know, it took us a long time to get Barry's diagnosis. He actually had already passed away a few years before I was able to find the diagnosis. So there were a lot of question marks for us. Like as a family, we would always talk about how we knew there could be a risk to me and my sisters for passing whatever Barry had on to our children. And that was always something that really concerned us. I think another concern for us was he did have a bunch of serious health concerns, and it was just always such a big question mark. Like, was this a big deal? Is this something he could get through? Was this going to change his baseline? Like, we really just didn't know. So I think those were some of the harder things, is just having those big question marks and wanting this person you love so much just to be healthy and be your normal brother and playmate. And that's how I saw him. So that's how I wanted everybody else to see him too.
Right. Tell me a little bit about what you guys found with this research, because obviously it takes a lot of work to compile it all. Then you get it all together and then are ready to disseminate to everyone. So what did you find? Jessica, can you go into that a little bit for us?
Absolutely. One of the things we found is that siblings have a lot of questions that perhaps are not necessarily being brought up or answered either by parents and certainly not by the medical team. So one of the most eye-opening pieces of our survey data that came out from the Angelman Project is that providers are not doing a good job addressing with parents sibling health and asking about siblings. And siblings want to be involved. They want to know what's going on with their sibling. They want to understand even the underlying cause of the rare disorder, and be very involved in helping their sibling. Siblings are also some of the best advocates, as Lexi just described, for her brother. And so siblings can be a huge part of treating and taking care of that sibling as well. The other things that we learned is that sometimes there's misinformation out there that siblings believe or think is the case that often is not the case, such as being able to catch something or, like Lexi described, what that means for future generations as well. And oftentimes there's some misconceptions about that I think cause anxiety. Siblings also have a lot of anxiety and other mental health concerns. That's something that we've identified quite a bit in clinic, that parents endorse a lot of anxiety that siblings have that sometimes can manifest as what we call somatic symptoms, or experiencing similar symptoms to the sibling, or experiencing true medical symptoms related to not having that same level of attention from families, which can be really challenging.
And I think one of the things with that misinformation too, that anybody's listening, if you haven't thought about yet, is we asked, so the way our survey worked is we had a parent survey, and once they finished, the sibling took a survey. We did siblings as young as 5, and there was no age cap. And it was really trying to see, parents, have you discussed the diagnosis? What do you discuss? And then siblings, what do you know about Angelman syndrome, through some multiple choice and open-ended questions. But we did have a handful of siblings think that they had a chance of getting Angelman syndrome. So not something that would just come up naturally in conversation, but when they're directly asked, they might have that misconception. So definitely something you want to be on the lookout for, and especially the younger kiddos who might not fully understand, and they might have that fear that they might have that condition at some point if they don't understand how it happens.
Yeah, and Lexi, I can see
So
your that too. Sorry. No, go ahead.
I just wanted to mention one other thing that came out of our survey data is that there's not enough resources. There's not enough resources for parents to start those conversations with siblings. There's not enough resources for siblings to look into a particular rare disorder and understand their siblings' rare disorder on their own. And so that's a big focus now that both Abby and I have, to try to develop some of those sibling resources. And that's why we've moved towards children's books.
Sure. And I mean, that's going to be huge to be able to walk us through. We actually put one together for our community because we figured awesome. If you can take it into school with you and it can explain on a basic level what your classmates are going to be seeing, then it helps to kind of break it down a little bit. It makes it a little less scary maybe, or a little less unexpected. So we put one together too, and we found that it's been really helpful for many of our families. But Lexi, I noticed as we were going through this and all the questions and all of those things, like you were nodding, like, yes, that was our experience too.
Definitely. I think like the anxiety piece is alive and well. I think like for me, it really like presents as like, when people get sick, I get very anxious. Like if anything happens with my mom, I think she's dying immediately, like anything like that, just because that was kind of the way it was with Barry. Like a simple cold could have killed him at any point, and we were taught that from little. So we were crazy about washing our hands, and we wouldn't let our friends in the house if they were sick, those kinds of things. There was so much you just said in that was just so much my experience, like being an advocate for him, whether it be, I used to research treatments and print them out and bring them to the doctor's appointments. And, at the same time, I would want the doctors to see him as more than just his list of symptoms, and like see that he was still a person. And that just because he had a global disability, it didn't mean that laying in a bed and being minimally responsive was his baseline, which is what a lot of inpatient providers would see of him, because he would be sick and they would just assume that's the normal for him. So I used to put pictures all over the hospital room of us when he was well and make them watch videos of him and stuff like that, just to try to get them to see the human side of him too.
And that's something interesting we did with our research too. We did just a general question that says, tell me about your sibling. And then we kind of characterized it into positive attributes, negative, or kind of both. And we found the majority of siblings were solely in that positive category. They were like, my sibling's happy and loving, and a lot of them celebrated milestones, which was so fun to see. They'd say like, my sibling can scoot on her butt now so she can get to us easier, and just these incredible milestones that, providers don't often acknowledge. And when they give a diagnosis, they're not often acknowledging these things. So it was so unique to see through these siblings' perspective, like their lens of their sibling.
Yeah, that's actually so true. I always have to laugh when I get my Facebook notifications, because I'll see the posts I posted like years ago, and it was like a little mom like bragging about her child, like when Barry would be a milestone, like I would post on Facebook, because it was that important to me. Like he was my world, and everything was centered around him.
I'll have to share with you, we made a really cool wing and picture, and it had all of the different phrases siblings use to describe it. And I keep meaning to turn it into like a sticker, because it turned out so cool with like the most common words that siblings use to describe the child with Angelman syndrome.
I love that. It's so special. Before we started, Jessica, I said, is there anything that we should talk about? And you were saying, it's so important to bring the siblings in on this. How do you incorporate them into this? How do you make sure that they're not feeling uncomfortable or guilty or afraid of sharing their own emotions? So how, as parents, do you make sure that they're supported?
That's a great question. I think one of the most important things is for us to create opportunities for parents to bring siblings to clinics, especially the type of clinic where we have these large multidisciplinary clinics, because I think that can facilitate a couple of things. One of the things that can facilitate is siblings connecting to each other, and that's huge. That is just a really important piece that we're trying to facilitate by creating some social media communities and websites where people can connect, because I think discussing that shared experience is just key. I think there's that piece of being really excited and, all of the victories that you see for your rare sibling, but also I think bringing up and creating discussion groups where you can discuss some of the challenges of that rare sibling often being and needing to be the focus, or what it's like when they're in the hospital. And so those conversations are really important. And I'd love to see multidisciplinary clinics being able to facilitate some of those discussions and help parents with those discussions. The other thing is having some of these resources available to start those conversations between parents and siblings, to make sure siblings know they can come to the parent and ask any questions. I think sometimes what we've seen and even experienced is that sometimes siblings are reluctant to even ask those questions of parents, because they feel like it's somewhat of a burden to be asking some of those more questions about why the sibling has that rare disorder, and that can be challenging. So creating those resources to have a shared experience, even for parents to share what the challenges are and the positives with the siblings, so that siblings know that parents might be feeling the same way as well, is really important.
And opening up the lines of communication, I guess, would be so important. We noticed that when we had our family conference in July, we had a whole herd of our families come and meet us in New York, and it was wonderful. And it was the first time that we've done a sib shop, and Lexi ran it, and we thought, okay, we're gonna just see how this goes, and without violating privacy, because I know that they told you a lot of things in confidence, but I think you were amazed too, Lexi, to hear what they had to say, because it was so well received in just this, open forum.
Yeah, so I had previously taken the Sib Shop Facilitator program, and I had read a lot of the research that went into that. And it was really amazing to see like exactly what the research shows, coming out to fruition. The siblings had so many of the similar concerns about their siblings, and just to watch them be like, oh wow, you worry about that too, like I've never had that kind of relationship with another kid before, was really beautiful. I saw some of like the most beautiful friendships blossom out of it. And I think that, like, I definitely agree with you. I think that, like, if siblings can meet, it's just such a different support system. I didn't know any other siblings with a child with a disability growing up, and I felt really alone because of that. I felt sometimes like talking about it to adults was almost like, if I said it out loud about like how sick he was or something, it would make it more real. And like sometimes I felt like I was the only person who could see the positive side of Barry. And so if I said something negative, I didn't want him to think like the last hope was giving up on him, kind of thing. And I think like siblings just see the child like so differently than the parents do and anybody else. So to have that kindred spirit and be able to see the positives and the abilities is just like so heartwarming.
Before we go to both of you, Abby and Jessica, Abby, I'll come to you first. What's your message for our parents? I know that the research was centered around Angelman's, but there's siblings in so many rare disease communities, and they're across the world. So for our parents specifically who will be listening to this, what's your message for them, Abby? Because there's so much that they need to hear, and there's a lot to be said about supporting other members of the family too.
Yeah. So I think for all the parents listening out there, my biggest piece of advice is just to be open and honest, starting at as young of an age as possible. Our sibling, the youngest we had, was 5-year-olds, and they were asking about how it works in the brain and different mechanisms, and just such in-depth, like, scientific questions in 5-year-olds. We didn't survey younger than that, but I'm guessing even 4-year-olds and earlier, like, they notice the differences. So there's not an age to start the conversation. I think the age is really as early as possible. We recognize when a family gets a diagnosis, it's scary. Parents go through a grieving period on their own, no matter what the diagnosis is. And that's obviously not the ideal time to start a conversation with a sibling. But at least if we can do better as providing information about siblings and trying to get that in your mind and giving you resources, then at least you can have that for when you're ready to start that discussion again, really as early as possible, because that's just going to help. And what we've also are hoping is that by having those earlier discussions, the sibling relationship is really going to enhance if siblings can understand a lot of the symptoms that the child exhibits.
Yeah, 100%. And Jessica, to you, your message to our parents?
I think my first message is that what we learned is that, and what we know is that siblings are taking in a whole lot more than we recognize and often give them credit for. Taking in a lot about learning, even if it's passively, they actually often know what their sibling has, at least the name of it and some of the symptoms of it. And so I think the most important thing I would say is start that conversation early, like Abby said, and really open up those lines of communication, check in with them frequently, give them opportunities to ask questions, and give them opportunities to see your emotions. It's okay for siblings to know that that the parent is also experiencing a lot of emotions about that rare diagnosis. And then lastly, the most important thing I think is always to figure out a way to make special time with that sibling. And that's often when these conversations can happen, and can be more open and honest, figuring out, a good opportunity to take them out for just like a coffee and sit down and have them get a treat and just sort of have those conversations where they feel the sibling feels like they're getting that one-on-one time with each of the parents. And it's important for both parents to do it.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, really important to open those lines of communication. And Lexi, lastly to you, I know that for our community specifically, we have a lot planned coming up here for our siblings, but after the first of the year, we do have some plans. If you want to touch on that just briefly.
Yes, so we are planning our first virtual Sib Shop for our Jordan siblings, Jordan syndrome siblings. It's going to be on January 7th. There will be one age group for the older children, so 13 plus, and one session for the younger kids from 8 to 13. And we will send out lots of details related to all of that, but we hope that everybody will sign up, and I think everyone will get a lot out of it if they join.
Definitely. Mark your calendars. Thank you to all three of you for all the input. I think it's so important. And I feel like we've only scratched the surface. We're going to be doing so much more with siblings that I hope that we can keep this conversation going and really work together to partner and move this forward, because it's so important for so many people across the world. So thank you for all that you do. We appreciate you. And we hope this is the first of many conversations too. So thank you.
Thanks so much for having us.
Yes.
Thank you.
And for all of you out there who are listening to our podcast right now, you can listen to others on Apple, Google, Spotify. Check out YouTube for translation services, or our website, jordansguardianangels.org, where you can find all of our podcasts as well. Thanks for joining us today. We'll see you guys again soon.